One thing to point out, and I tell in all the videos, is that the difference between giving strokes, lines, and giving points. When you give a stroke, you let in the top part of the line of the stroke more pigment. Also in the area you lift up the brush. This means that you don't have too much control when you give strokes, but you have control when you do points. When you do the glaze pointing technique, this allows you to leave the pigment in the exact area you want. We left it here with all the light placed, all the volumes. Now it's time to place color. I will use the polycolor from my Mary, using only the primary colors to get all the mixes, plus white and black. You can use the brands you want. If you have Vallejo, if you have Citadel, it's okay, but these ones have more quality. Now I spread out the dots like this because, like in doubles, like in pairs, because I want to get the mixes without cleaning my brush like I do here. To do skin is really easy. You get orange and you mix it with a bit of white. That's a good skin warm tone. I want you to go a bit more further. I want you to do like 4-5 tones of skin. In my case, in this project I did like 10. This is more or less like dwarf skin, okay? You can add a bit more of blue to give a more interesting touch to the skin, maybe from shadows. Create a purple, 2 tones of purple, mix it with the skin. You have there 3 tones of skin. You get green, mix it again with the base skin, and look how in a few minutes you have there a lot of skin tones. Why I say you to create your own mixes? Because it adds an extra layer to you as a painter of satisfaction. This is unique. This is your own skin. You didn't get any name of a bottle that other guy created. And also because of creative reasons, practical reasons. Your brain works different if you see all the palettes, all the colors in your palette, because the decision is like in a few seconds, in a few moments. If you have to stop and have to think what bottle get here, the royal emerald, royal purple, your brain stops the creative process. Your brain gets more lazy instead of doing it in this way. We continue with the light. Look how I added a bit of green in the max light, and you have in the sides, in the left, you have a more warm light. This depends a lot in the position of the light of the face in the figure. For example, a light that's in the jaw, we will use a more green tone of skin. And lately I'm used to create this amount of mixes. These are a lot. In the beginnings of my project of learning about color, I said to you guys, do like 4 or 5 mixes. Here I'm getting now like 12. In the top you have 2 green tones, purples, orange, and more important for me, gray in the middle. This project, if something talked to me, is about using gray. We are not used to place gray in the faces. We are fantasy painters and we love placing saturation, placing strong colors. And gray is really useful to desaturate all the shadows, for example, and to add a more smooth looking. Here, more tones. I wanted a complete palette, so when I need a color, I just have to grab it. With our particular medium thinner, glaze medium with varnish, ultramatte varnish. You can use the normal thinner. We're going to get a saturated tone of skin to place the base tone. Why this saturation? When we study the illustrators, we notice a few things. They use the saturation to create the mid-tone. If we analyze the great Roberto Ferri, we notice one thing. We have to divide the skin in three: light, mid-tone, and shadow. Where goes the more saturation? In the mid-tone, in the intersection between the light and the shadow. So, what's the best way to paint it? Imagine if you had to paint first the highlight and then a thin line by airbrush or by brush of the mid-tone and then the shadow. It would be a bit rough and difficult to paint. The best way for me, I discovered, is paint first the saturation tone, the base tone of the mid-tone, and then we can place highlight over it. If you go a step further and we analyze a bit the real life, you can notice that when a strong light affects our skin, you can see that the area that's more near to the light and the angle of that light, it's a bit more white, a bit more overexposed, instead of the sides of the face or the sides of the light. You can see that the color gains in protagonism here and surrounds the light area of the facial features. And when you observe the shadow area, you notice again the desaturation, the losses of color. You can go again a bit further. If you notice the ears and the nose has more reddish tones, more saturation, that's because the light, it's able to come through these cartilaginous parts. That areas are more transparent, and that's why we have normally the ears and the nose more red. So explaining this, we can start giving strokes with the airbrush. Look at the dilution. This is quite diluted because I want to see the previous work we did with the black and with the white. Don't worry if you cover it out all, because in the next steps we will do it. But you have in your brain the map, the light map of the rebondance. We chose like a little highlight tone. It needed more saturation, right? So we give a little more saturations, and we get advantage of our mistake, or color mistake, and we try to place that line, that dividing line, only in the mid-tone. This means you have to divide the highlight in three. There's highlight, mid-tone, and shadow. So now in the airbrush we are only giving strokes in that mid-tone. This is more or less the saturation I wanted. A tip: when you finish an important part, just study what you already did. What's missing here? I wanted a more Caucasic type of skin. This is more orangey, so it needed a touch, a hint of pink. So we get a wash of this pink and start giving glazes over it. Painting is like this. Painting is not 1 to 5 steps. It's an alive process, and it's full of mistakes. You have to correct it. And the more mistakes you do, the quicker you learn. Much more realistic, right? Here we again use advantage of our previous mistake, and we let the light that's coming from back and from the sides with that warm touch we did in the beginnings. So here we are achieving a warm surrounding of light. Imagine if we didn't make that mistake. Maybe we wouldn't know this. And when we are satisfied with the result, with the base tone of the skin, we can let the airbrush aside and we can get the brush. Further in the video we will again use the airbrush to unify, to give tones, and then get the brush. This is like a symbiosis between the two tools. So I here gonna do the glaze point technique I loved. This is a really easy technique that allows you a lot of control. But first I want to show you the particularities. It's a glaze. The dilution has to be a glaze, really diluted paint. You clean the brush and you get only with the tip. You clean it again. You have to clean it like 5-6 times in the paper, so that it barely paints. Look at my nail. It barely paints. And now with this dilution, you start pointing over the surface. In this case, the skin. Look at the shape I wanted to create. I start in the center of the shape and I go in the surroundings of that shape with more points and with more divisions between that point. I focus the pigment in the center of the shape. And look how in few steps you do a highlight, a really smooth highlight, also with skin texture. One thing to point out, and I tell in all the videos, is that the difference between giving strokes, lines, and giving points. When you give a stroke, you let in the top part of the line of the stroke more pigment. Also in the area you lift up the brush. This means that you don't have too much control when you give strokes, but you have control when you do points. When you do the glaze pointing technique, this allows you to leave the pigment in the exact area you want. The same with the shadows. We use a low value of shadows and we start doing that point technique in the areas we want more contrast in the skin. Look how easily you obtain a little more contrast, and also in a smooth way. I think that this is the mainly problem of all painters, how to do a smooth transition between layers, between big steps. And this is really interesting because if you watch closely, the more you go outside the shape, in this case shadows, the more little dots, little drops I do, the more I spread those little drops. I creating here texture, I creating here little stains of the skin that adds a realistic touch to the surface. Look how with 2 or 3 touches the arm is barely finished. It needed a bit more of work, but you have it already, all the important part done. This arm will be covered by the tattoo, but I wanted to show you this example because it's a really easy surface to practice. It's a cylinder and you can practice and see all the knowledge of the sides. For example, this is an arm that's affected by 3 sources of light. The one that's in the center, zenithal, the rebonding of the belly that's affecting the side, the right side of the arm, and the one that's in the left, that's the same as the one in the ass and the back part. Imagine this arm with only 1 source of light. Will be a bit plain, right? With this technique we'll also create volume. In the next video we will focus in the face and we'll show you a bit more of tricks.